She wasn't supposed to survive the night. No one expected her to save them all. A woman past her prime arrives in a frontier town expecting marriage, only to find her groom dead and a powerful rancher who wanted someone younger, prettier, more useful. What happens next will prove that some women don't just survive. They conquer. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Eliza Harrow didn't wait for the driver to open the door. She pushed it herself, stepping down into the choking dust of Cinder Ridge with the practiced balance of someone who'd been rattled by worse roads than this. The afternoon sun hit her square in the face, unforgiving and flat, the kind of light that showed every line, every year, every mistake written into a person's skin. She was 52. She knew exactly how she looked. The town stretched before her like a promise someone had forgotten to keep. Wooden buildings weathered gray, a mercantile with peeling paint, a saloon that seemed to lean on its own shadow for support. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else, a door slammed. But mostly, there was silence, the kind that meant people were watching. Eliza adjusted the worn shawl around her shoulders and reached into her pocket, fingers brushing the letters she'd read so many times the creases had gone soft. Seeking a woman of good character for marriage, modest home, steady work, respectability assured. It had been signed by a man named Thomas Kern, shopkeeper, widower, lonely. She'd written back within the week. Now Thomas Kern was 6 feet under, dead from pneumonia 3 days before she arrived. The telegram had been waiting at the last relay station, clinical and cold. Regret to inform. No need to continue journey, but Eliza had gotten on the stagecoach anyway, because going back meant admitting there was something to go back to. There wasn't. The driver thumped her trunk onto the dirt beside her, not unkindly, but not gently either. Need help finding someone, ma'am? No, Eliza said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. She cleared her throat. I'll manage. He tipped his hat and climbed back up, and the coach pulled away, leaving her standing there with her trunk and her letter and the weight of every eye in town on her back. She didn't turn around. A woman approached from the direction of the mercantile, middle-aged, aproned, curious. Her expression was cautious, the way people looked at strangers in small towns, polite until proven otherwise. You the mail-order bride? The woman asked. Eliza almost laughed. I was supposed to be. The woman's face softened, but not with pity. Something closer to practicality. Heard about Thomas. Shame. He was a good man. She paused. I'm Martha. Run the general store with my husband. Eliza Harrow. Martha glanced at the trunk, then back at Eliza. You planning to stay? I don't have anywhere else to be. It was the truth, and Martha seemed to respect that. She nodded slowly. Well, you'll need to talk to Rowan Blackwell. Eliza frowned. Who's that? Owns most of the land around here, big ranch north of town. He's the one who arranged Thomas's advertisement. Helped him pay for it anyway. Figured he'd want to know you're here. Why would he care? Martha's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Because Rowan Blackwell cares about everything that happens in Cinder Ridge, whether he wants to or not. She pointed toward the far end of the street, where a tall man stood outside the land office, his back to them. Even from a distance, Eliza could tell he was the kind of man people made room for. Broad shoulders, dark coat, boots planted like he owned the ground beneath them. He was talking to another man, gesturing with one hand, his voice low and deliberate. That's him, Martha said. Good luck. Eliza didn't believe in luck. She believed in surviving the day and waking up to try again. So she picked up her skirts, left her trunk where it sat, and walked toward Rowan Blackwell. He didn't notice her at first. He was too focused on the man in front of him, a wiry fellow with ink-stained fingers who kept nodding nervously. I don't care what the county says, Rowan was saying. That fence line's been there for 15 years. If they want to move it, they can come talk to me themselves. Yes, sir, Mr. Blackwell. I'll let them know. Do that. The man scurried off and Rowan turned, finally seeing Eliza. His gaze moved over her in a single sweep, quick, assessing, dismissive. She'd seen that look before. It was the look men gave women who didn't matter. Help you? He asked. I'm Eliza Harrow. He blinked. Who? Thomas Kern's bride. Rowan went very still. Then his jaw tightened, and something cold flickered across his face. "You're joking." "I'm not." He stared at her. Really stared, this time. Not the quick dismissal from before, but a harder look. One that lingered on the silver threading through her dark hair, the lines around her eyes, the way her dress hung loose in places it used to fit. She met his gaze without flinching. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "I rarely am." His mouth pressed into a thin line. "Thomas didn't mention—" He stopped himself, shook his head. "Never mind. Doesn't matter now."
"No," Eliza agreed.
"It doesn't." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Somewhere down the street, a horse whinnied. A child laughed. The world kept moving, indifferent. "You should go home," Rowan said. "I don't have one." "Then go wherever you came from." "No." The word hung between them, blunt and immovable. Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, I don't know what you're expecting, but Thomas is dead. There's no arrangement anymore, no marriage, no home." "I know that." "Then why are you still here?" Eliza took a breath. "Because I spent the last of my money getting here. Because I have nowhere else to go. And because running away from things that fall apart hasn't done me any good so far." Rowan looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't planned for, which, she supposed, she was. "I can work," she added. "I'm not asking for charity, just a chance." "A chance to do what?" "Whatever needs doing." He laughed, short and humorless. "This isn't Boston or Philadelphia, Mrs. Harrow. This is cattle country. It's hard. It's mean. And it doesn't care how tough you think you are." "I'm not from Boston," Eliza said quietly. "And I already know it's hard." Something in her voice made him pause. He studied her again, slower this time, and she wondered what he saw. A woman too old to be useful? Too worn to be worth the trouble? Let him think it. She'd been underestimated before. "There's a boarding house," Rowan said finally. 2 blocks that way. Tell Mrs. Granger I sent you. She'll give you a room for the night." "And after that?" "After that, you figure out your next move. I'm not responsible for you." Eliza nodded. "Fair enough." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "Mrs. Harrow." She looked back. "Why'd you come all this way for a man you'd never met?" It was a fair question. She considered lying, giving him something simple and safe. But she was tired of lies. "Because staying where I was felt like dying," she said, "and I wasn't ready for that yet." Rowan didn't respond. He just watched her walk away, and Eliza didn't look back to see if he was still there. The boarding house smelled like lye soap and old wood. Mrs. Granger was a stout woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, but she didn't ask questions when Eliza mentioned Rowan's name, just handed over a key and pointed upstairs. The room was small, a bed, a chair, a window that looked out over the street. Eliza set her bag down and sat on the edge of the mattress, feeling the springs creak beneath her. She didn't cry. She'd used up her tears a long time ago. Instead, she pulled off her boots, lay back, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what came next. Tonight, she was just too damn tired. Morning came too early and too bright. Eliza woke to the sound of hammering somewhere down the street and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face from the basin, and went downstairs. Mrs. Granger was at the stove frying eggs. She glanced at Eliza. "You staying another night?" "If you'll have me." "Can you pay?" "Not much, but I can work." Mrs. Granger grunted. "Kitchen needs scrubbing. Floors, too. You do that. We'll call it even for tonight." "Deal." Eliza ate breakfast standing up, then rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The kitchen was a disaster. Grease caked on the stove, dishes piled high, floor sticky in places she didn't want to think about. She scrubbed until her hands were raw and her back ached, but by midday the place gleamed. Mrs. Granger inspected it with the eye of a general reviewing troops. "You'll do," she said grudgingly. "You need more work. I know a woman who does laundry. Pays not much, but it's steady." "I'll take it." And just like that, Eliza had a foothold. It wasn't much, but it was something. 3 days passed. Eliza worked, kept her head down, and learned the rhythm of Cinder Ridge. It was a town that ran on cattle, commerce, and the iron will of Rowan Blackwell. His name came up everywhere, at the mercantile, the saloon, the church steps. People spoke of him with respect, fear, or both. She saw him once, riding through town on a black gelding, his hat pulled low. He didn't look her way. On the fourth day, everything changed. Eliza was hauling water from the pump behind the boarding house when she heard the commotion, raised voices, the clatter of hooves, a woman shouting. She set the bucket down and walked toward the noise. A crowd had gathered near the livery. In the center of it stood Rowan Blackwell, his face like a thundercloud, and beside him, a young woman Eliza had never seen before. She was beautiful, maybe 22, with golden hair pinned up beneath a feathered hat, and a traveling dress that probably cost more than Eliza had earned in a year. Her eyes were red, her expression furious. "You can't do this," the woman was saying. "We had an agreement." Rowan's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "The agreement was with Thomas Kern. He's dead." "Then the agreement transfers to you. You sponsored it. You paid for it." "I helped a friend. That doesn't make me responsible for his debts." "I'm not a debt," her voice cracked. "I traveled halfway across the country because I was promised a home, a husband, a life." Rowan's jaw worked. "I'm sorry, but I can't give you that." The woman's hands clenched into fists. "I have nowhere to go." "That's not my problem," the crowd murmured. Eliza felt something twist in her chest. Recognition, maybe. Or sympathy. She knew what it felt like to be stranded. She stepped forward before she could think better of it. "Excuse me?" Rowan turned, saw her, and his expression darkened. "Mrs. Harrow, this doesn't concern you." "Maybe not," Eliza said. "But I know what it's like to show up expecting one thing and get another." The young woman looked at her, confusion flickering across her face. "Who are you?" "Someone who came here for the same reason you did." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Eliza." "Let me talk to her," Eliza said quietly. "Please." He hesitated, then stepped back. The young woman watched Eliza approach, wary. "What's your name?" Eliza asked. "Catherine. Catherine Hale." "I'm Eliza Harrow, and you're right. You were promised something. You deserve better than this." Catherine's lips trembled. "Then why isn't he helping me?" "Because he doesn't know how," Eliza said. "Men like him think everything can be solved with money or land or a firm handshake. They don't understand what it costs to start over." Catherine wiped her eyes. "What am I supposed to do?" Eliza glanced at Rowan, then back at Catherine. "You fight, you find work, you make a place for yourself, whether anyone wants to give it to you or not." "That's easy for you to say." "No," Eliza said. "It's not, but it's the only option you've got." For a long moment, Catherine just stared at her. Then, slowly, she nodded. Rowan stepped forward again. "I'll pay for a room at the boarding house, 1 week. After that, you're on your own." It wasn't kindness, it was obligation, but Catherine took it. "Thank you," she said stiffly. She walked away and the crowd began to disperse. Eliza turned to leave, but Rowan caught her arm. "What the hell was that?" he asked. "Compassion," Eliza said. "You should try it sometime." She pulled free and walked away, leaving him standing there in the dust. That evening, there was a knock on Eliza's door. She opened it to find Rowan Blackwell standing in the hallway, hat in hand, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Can I come in?" he asked. Eliza stepped aside. He entered, glanced around the tiny room, and let out a breath. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For being an ass." She almost smiled. "You were protecting yourself. Can't fault you for that." "Maybe not. But I could have handled it better." He turned to face her. "You were right. About Catherine. About all of it." Eliza sat down on the edge of the bed. "What do you want, Mr. Blackwell?" "I want to offer you a job." She blinked. "Doing what?" "Housekeeper, cook, whatever you're willing to do. My place is falling apart, and I don't have time to fix it. You need work. It makes sense." "Does it?" "I think so." Eliza studied him. "Why now? You told me 3 days ago I wasn't your problem." "I was wrong." It was a simple answer, honest. She appreciated that. "How much does it pay?" she asked. "Room, board, and $20 a month." It was more than she'd make doing laundry, more than she'd hoped for. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow." Eliza stood and extended her hand. "Then we have a deal." Rowan shook it, his grip firm and calloused.
I'll pick you up at dawn.
He left, and Eliza sat back down, staring at the door. She didn't know what she'd just agreed to, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope. Dawn came cold and gray. Eliza was waiting outside the boarding house when Rowan pulled up in a wagon, 2 horses hitched to the front. He nodded at her, and she climbed up beside him without a word. They rode in silence for the first mile. The town fell away behind them, replaced by open grassland that stretched toward distant hills. The air smelled like sage and dust and something wilder, something Eliza couldn't name. "How far is it?" she asked. "About an hour." She nodded and settled in, watching the land roll past. It was harsh country, unforgiving, but there was a strange beauty to it, the way the light hit the ridges, the way the wind moved through the grass like water. "You ever been on a ranch before?" Rowan asked. "No. It's different out here, harder than town." "I noticed." He glanced at her. "You sure you're up for this?" Eliza met his gaze. "Are you?" He huffed a laugh, soft and surprised. "Fair enough." They lapsed back into silence, but it felt easier now, less like strangers, more like 2 people trying to figure each other out. The ranch appeared on the horizon slowly, first the outline of buildings, then details. A sprawling house with a wide porch, a barn that had seen better days, corrals and fences stretching in every direction. It was bigger than Eliza had expected, grander in a worn-down kind of way. Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down. Eliza followed, taking it all in. "Not much to look at," Rowan said. "It's enough." He led her inside. The house was dim, the curtains drawn, dust motes drifting in the shafts of light that slipped through the cracks. The furniture was solid but neglected. The floors scuffed, the air stale. "Kitchen's through there," Rowan said, pointing. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the left. Bathroom's at the end of the hall. You need anything, let me know." Eliza set her bag down. "When's the last time someone cleaned this place?" "Too long." "I can see that." He almost smiled. "I'll leave you to it then." He walked out, and Eliza stood alone in the quiet house, listening to the creak of the boards beneath her feet. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The first week was brutal. Eliza scrubbed floors, washed windows, aired out rooms that hadn't been touched in years. She found mouse nests in the pantry, mold in the cellar, and a leak in the roof that had stained the ceiling above the spare bedroom. Rowan was gone most days, out on the range with his men. When he came back, he was tired, dusty, and quiet. He ate whatever she put in front of him without complaint, then disappeared into his study or his room. They didn't talk much. But Eliza noticed things. The way he favored his left leg when he walked. The scar on his hand that looked old and deep. The way his shoulders tensed whenever someone mentioned the name Kern. On the 8th day, she found him in the barn, working on a broken saddle. She stood in the doorway, watching. "Need help?" she asked. He glanced up. "You know how to stitch leather?" "I know how to stitch. Can't be that different." He handed her the needle and thread, and she sat down beside him. They worked in silence, the only sound the scrape of the needle through leather and the soft shuffle of horses in their stalls. "Why'd you help Thomas?" Eliza asked after a while. Rowan's hand stilled. "What do you mean?" "With the advertisement. Martha said you paid for it." He went back to work, not looking at her. "Thomas was a good man. Lonely. I thought he deserved a chance. And now he's dead, and you're stuck with me." "I'm not stuck with you." "Feels like it." Rowan set the saddle aside and turned to face her. "You want to know the truth? I didn't think anyone would answer that ad. I thought Thomas would realize how stupid it was and give up. But you showed up, and Catherine showed up, and now I'm trying to figure out how the hell to fix it." "You can't fix everything, Mr. Blackwell." "I know that." "Then stop trying." He stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "You're not what I expected." "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." Eliza stood, brushing the dust from her skirts. "I'm going to start dinner. Don't work too late." She left him there, and when she glanced back, he was still watching her. The second week, things began to settle. Eliza found a rhythm, mornings in the kitchen, afternoons mending or cleaning, evenings reading by the fire. The house started to feel less like a shell and more like a home. She met the ranch hands, a grizzled man named Davis, a quiet boy named Sam, and a few others who tipped their hats and kept their distance. They watched her with curiosity, but no one asked questions. One afternoon, Eliza noticed the garden behind the house. It was overgrown, choked with weeds, the beds cracked and dry. She asked Rowan if she could work on it. "Do whatever you want," he said. "It's been dead for years." So Eliza got to work. She cleared the weeds, turned the soil, planted seeds she bought in town. It was slow, back-breaking work, but it felt good, like she was building something. Rowan found her there one evening, kneeling in the dirt, her hands muddy.
"You really think anything's going to grow out here?" he asked. "Yes." "Why?" She sat back on her heels. "Because things don't die just because you stop looking at them. They wait. And when someone cares enough to try, they come back." Rowan was quiet for a long time. Then he crouched down beside her. "Need help?" he asked. Eliza handed him a trowel. "Sure." They worked until the sun set, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Eliza felt like she might actually belong. The third week brought trouble. It started with the calf. One of the ranch hands found it in the north pasture, weak and struggling, its mother dead beside it. Davis brought it to the house, his face grim. "Won't last the night," he said. Rowan looked at the calf, then at Eliza. "You know anything about livestock?" "Some." "Then it's yours. Do what you can." The men left, and Eliza was alone with the calf. It was small, trembling, its eyes glassy with fever. She carried it inside, wrapped it in blankets, and spent the night feeding it warm milk from a bottle, talking to it in a low, steady voice. By morning, the calf was still alive. By the second morning, it was stronger. By the third, it was standing. Davis saw it and shook his head. "I'll be damned." Word spread. The woman who brought the calf back from the dead. The woman who made things grow. The woman who didn't quit. Respect came slowly, grudgingly, but it came, and Rowan Blackwell started looking at her differently. It was late April when the letter arrived. Rowan brought it to the house, his face tight. "What is it?" Eliza asked. "Trouble." He handed her the letter. It was from a family in St. Louis, Catherine Hale's family. They were demanding Rowan honor the arrangement, demanding he marry Catherine or face legal action. Eliza read it twice, then set it down. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "You could marry her." Rowan's head snapped up. "What?" "It would solve the problem." "I don't want to marry her." "Then what do you want?" He stared at her, and for a moment the world went quiet. "I don't know," he said again, but his eyes said something else. Eliza turned away, her heart pounding. "You'll figure it out." She left him standing there, and neither of them spoke of it again. But something had shifted, something neither of them could take back. And in the days that followed, the weight of it hung between them, unspoken and undeniable. The storm came without warning. Eliza was in the kitchen when she heard the shout, urgent, panicked. She ran outside to find the ranch hands gathered near the barn, Rowan in the center, his face ashen. "What happened?" she asked. "The mare," Davis said. "She's foaling. Something's wrong." Eliza pushed through the crowd. Inside the barn, the mare was down, her sides heaving, eyes rolling with pain. The men stood around, useless, scared. "She's going to die," one of them muttered. "No," Eliza said. She knelt beside the mare, running her hands over the animal's belly, feeling the shape of the foal inside. Breech. She'd seen it before years ago on a farm she didn't like to think about. "I need towels," she said. "Water and space." The men hesitated. "Now!" she snapped. They scattered. Rowan stayed, crouching beside her. "Can you save her?" he asked. "I don't know, but I'm going to try." For the next hour, Eliza worked. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, guiding the mare through the agony. The foal came slowly, too slowly, and twice Eliza thought she'd lost them both. But then, finally, the foal slipped free. Wet, trembling, alive. The mare lifted her head, nuzzling her baby, and Eliza sat back, covered in blood and sweat, shaking. Rowan pulled her to her feet. "You did it. We did it." He smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. After that night, everything changed. The ranch hands treated her with respect. The town started talking, and Rowan Blackwell stopped pretending he didn't care. But the letter from St. Louis still sat on his desk, unanswered. And Eliza knew, sooner or later, a choice would have to be made.
She just didn't know if she'd be part of it. The foal took its first wobbly steps 3 days later, and by then the whole town had heard the story. Eliza didn't know who'd spread it, probably Davis, who couldn't keep his mouth shut even if you paid him, but it didn't matter. When she went into Cinder Ridge for supplies, people nodded at her, actually looked her in the eye. Martha cornered her at the mercantile, arms crossed, a knowing smile on her face. Heard you saved Blackwell's prize mare.
The mare saved herself, Eliza said, examining a sack of flour. I just helped. That's not what I heard. Davis says you had your hands inside that horse up to your elbows, calm as Sunday morning. Eliza set the flour down. Davis talks too much. Maybe, but he's not wrong. Martha leaned in. People are noticing you, Eliza. That's not a small thing in a place like this. I'm not looking to be noticed. Too late for that. Eliza paid for her supplies and left, but Martha's words stuck with her. Being noticed meant being seen, and being seen meant people would have expectations. She'd spent most of her life disappointing those. When she got back to the ranch, Rowan was in the corral with Sam, working a young gelding on a long line. The horse fought every step, tossing its head, trying to bolt. Rowan's voice stayed level, patient, but his jaw was tight. Eliza set the supplies on the porch and watched. After 10 minutes, the gelding finally settled into a steady trot, and Rowan let out a breath. Stubborn bastard, he muttered as Sam took the lead. Reminds me of someone, Eliza called out. Rowan turned, caught off guard, then something like a grin pulled at his mouth. You talking about me or the horse? Whichever one fits. He walked over, dusting his hands on his pants. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hair falling across his forehead. He looked tired. He always looked tired. Need help with those? He asked, nodding at the supply sacks. I've got it. I know you do. I'm asking anyway. Eliza picked up 2 of the lighter bags. Then I won't stop you. They carried everything inside in silence. Rowan set his load on the kitchen table and lingered, like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how. What is it? Eliza asked. The letter. Her hands stilled on a jar of preserves. What about it? The Hales are coming. Catherine's father and brother. They'll be here in 2 weeks. Eliza turned to face him. And? And they're going to push. Hard. They want the marriage to happen, and they've got lawyers ready to make my life hell if I refuse. So marry her. Rowan's expression darkened. I don't want to marry her. Then don't. It's not that simple. Why not? He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Because I gave my word to Thomas. Because I sponsored the arrangement. Because if I back out now, I look like a liar and a coward. And in this territory, reputation is everything. Eliza crossed her arms. So you'd rather marry a woman you don't love than risk what people think of you? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Rowan's eyes flashed. You don't understand how this works. No, I understand perfectly. You're scared. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Rowan stared at her, his chest rising and falling, and for a moment Eliza thought he might yell. But he didn't. He just turned and walked out. Eliza stood there, gripping the edge of the table, her heart pounding. She shouldn't have said it. It wasn't her business. Rowan Blackwell's life, his choices, his mistakes, they had nothing to do with her, except they did. Because somewhere along the way, she'd started caring. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. The house creaked and settled around her, and she thought about the letter, about Catherine Hale, about the look on Rowan's face when he'd walked away. She got up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and went downstairs. The kitchen was dark except for the faint glow of embers in the stove. She was reaching for the kettle when she heard footsteps behind her. Rowan stood in the doorway, barefoot, his shirt untucked. He looked as restless as she felt. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. No. He came into the kitchen, lit the lamp on the table. The light caught the scar on his hand, a jagged line that ran from his thumb to his wrist. How'd you get that? Eliza asked. Rowan glanced down. Broke up a fight between 2 of my hands. One of them had a knife. I was younger, stupider. And now? Now I'm just stupid in different ways. Eliza almost smiled. She poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove. You want coffee? Sure. They sat at the table waiting for the water to boil. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable.
It felt like two people too tired to pretend. "I'm sorry," Rowan said finally. "For earlier. You were right. I am scared." Eliza looked at him. "Of what? Of making the wrong choice, of letting people down, of being the kind of man who breaks his word." He paused. "My father was that man. Everyone knew it. He made promises he couldn't keep, borrowed money he'd never pay back. When he died, I spent 5 years cleaning up his mess. I swore I'd never be like him." "You're not." "How do you know?" "Because you care too much. Men like your father don't lose sleep over doing the right thing." Rowan's throat worked. "What if there is no right thing? What if every choice I make hurts someone?" "Then you pick the one you can live with." The kettle whistled. Eliza got up, poured the coffee, and set a cup in front of him. He wrapped his hands around it, staring into the dark liquid. "Catherine's a good woman," he said quietly. "She deserves better than this. Better than me." "Maybe. But you deserve better than a marriage built on obligation." "And what do I deserve, Mrs. Harrow?" Eliza met his eyes. "I don't know, but I know you won't find it by giving up." Rowan studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Thank you," he said. Eliza's breath caught. His hand was warm, rough, solid. She should pull away. She knew she should, but she didn't. "For what?" she asked. "For not letting me off easy." He squeezed her hand once, then let go. Stood up. "I should try to sleep." "Me too." He left, and Eliza sat there alone, her hand still tingling where he'd touched her. The next morning, Rowan rode out before dawn. Eliza didn't see him until late afternoon, when he came back with a wagon full of lumber and a grim look on his face. "What's all this?" she asked. "Barn needs repairs. Figured I'd do something useful instead of sitting around worrying." Davis and Sam helped unload the wood, and for the rest of the day the sound of hammering echoed across the ranch. Eliza went back to her work, laundry, cooking, mending a tear in one of the curtains, but she kept glancing out the window. Rowan moved like a man trying to outrun his thoughts. Fast, relentless, barely stopping to drink water. By the time the sun started to set, he'd replaced half the barn's siding and looked ready to collapse. Eliza brought him a plate of food and a canteen. "You're going to kill yourself." "I'm fine." "You look like hell." He took the canteen, drank deeply, then wiped his mouth. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." "I'm serious, Rowan. You need to rest." "I'll rest when I'm done." "Done with what? The barn? The ranch? Running yourself into the ground?" He set the canteen down, his eyes hard. "What do you want me to say, Eliza?" "I want you to admit you're not fine, that you're scared and angry and you don't know what to do. I want you to stop pretending." Rowan's jaw clenched. "And then what? What happens after I admit it?" "I don't know, but at least it'd be the truth." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, the fight went out of him. He sank down onto a stack of lumber, his head in his hands. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice rough. "I don't know how to make it right." Eliza sat down beside him. "Maybe you can't. Maybe all you can do is make a choice and deal with the fallout." "And if I choose wrong?" "Then you deal with that too." Rowan looked at her, and for the first time she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. Not just from the work, from carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you keep going when everything falls apart?" Eliza thought about it. About all the times she'd wanted to quit, to lie down and let the world roll over her. About the morning she'd gotten up anyway, because staying down felt worse. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I just do." Rowan nodded slowly. "You're stronger than me." "No, I'm just more stubborn." He laughed, short and tired, and it was the best sound she'd heard all day. They sat there as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The air cooled. Somewhere, a coyote called, and for a few minutes, the world felt almost peaceful. The Hales arrived on a Tuesday, in a fancy carriage that kicked up enough dust to be seen from a mile away. Eliza was in the garden when she heard the commotion, and by the time she reached the house, a small crowd had gathered. Catherine stepped out first, her face pale and tight. Behind her came a tall man in his 50s, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than the whole ranch. That had to be the father. The brother came last, younger, leaner, with the same cold eyes. Rowan was already on the porch, his expression unreadable. Eliza hung back, watching. "Mr. Blackwell," the father said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I'm Thomas Hale. This is my son, Richard. I believe you know my daughter." "Mr. Hale." Rowan's tone was polite, but there was no warmth in it. "I wasn't expecting you so soon. We thought it best to handle this matter in person." Thomas Hale glanced around the ranch, his gaze lingering on the worn buildings, the dusty corral. "May we speak inside?" "Of course." They filed into the house, and Eliza caught Catherine's eye as she passed. The younger woman looked miserable, her hands twisted together. Eliza wanted to say something, offer some kind of comfort, but what could she say? This wasn't her fight. The door closed, and the ranch hands drifted back to work, muttering among themselves. Eliza stayed where she was, rooted to the spot. Inside, voices rose and fell. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Anger, pressure, demands. 20 minutes later, the door opened. Thomas Hale stepped out first, his face hard. Richard followed, then Catherine, who looked like she'd been crying. Rowan came last, his shoulders stiff. "We'll expect your answer by the end of the week," Thomas said. "Don't disappoint us, Mr. Blackwell. You won't like the consequences." They climbed back into the carriage and left, the wheels churning up dirt in their wake. Rowan stood on the porch, watching them go. Eliza walked over. "What happened?" she asked. "They gave me an ultimatum. Marry Catherine within the month, or they'll sue me for breach of contract and damages. They've got lawyers in Denver ready to go." "Can they do that?" "Probably. I don't know. Maybe." He rubbed his face. "Even if they can't win, they can drag it out long enough to ruin me. Legal fees alone would bankrupt this place." Eliza's stomach twisted. "So what are you going to do?" Rowan looked at her, and in his eyes she saw defeat. "I don't have a choice." "You always have a choice." "Not this time." He walked past her, heading toward the barn, and Eliza wanted to grab him, shake him, make him see that giving up wasn't the answer. But she didn't, because maybe he was right. Maybe some fights couldn't be won. That night, Eliza sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the letter Thomas Hale had left on the table. It laid out the terms in cold, precise language. Marriage, settlement, obligation. She thought about Catherine, who didn't want this any more than Rowan did. She thought about the ranch, the life Rowan had built, the weight he carried. And she thought about herself, standing on the edges of someone else's story, trying to pretend she didn't care how it ended. But she did care. Too much. The door creaked and Rowan came in. He looked surprised to see her still awake. "Can't sleep again?" he asked. "No." He poured himself a drink from the bottle he kept in the cupboard, then sat down across from her. "You should. Nothing you can do about this." "I could leave." Rowan's head snapped up. "What?" "If I'm gone, it's one less complication, one less thing for people to talk about." "Where the hell did that come from?" Eliza met his eyes. "I've seen the way people look at us. At me. They're wondering what I'm doing here, why you hired me, what we are to each other." "And what are we, Eliza?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Eliza looked away. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But I know it's making things harder for you." Rowan set his glass down hard. "You think I care what people say?" "Yes. You care about everything people say. It's the whole reason you're in this mess." "That's not fair. It's true." He stood up, pacing. "You leaving doesn't fix anything. The Hales don't care about you. They care about the contract, the marriage, their daughter's future." "Then marry her and be done with it." Rowan stopped, turned to face her. "Is that really what you want?" Eliza's throat tightened. "What I want doesn't matter. It does to me." The words hit her like a punch. She stared at him, unable to speak, and he stared back, his chest rising and falling. "Eliza," he said, his voice rough. "I don't want to marry Catherine. I don't want any of this, but I don't know how to get out of it without losing everything." "So you'll lose yourself instead?" "Maybe that's the price." Eliza stood, closing the distance between them. "You're better than this. You're better than your father, better than every man who's ever broken a promise. Don't prove them wrong by proving them right." Rowan's eyes searched hers. What am I supposed to do? Fight for what you want, for who you want to be. And if I lose, then at least you'll have tried. They stood there, so close she could feel the heat coming off him, see the flicker of hope and fear in his eyes. His hand came up, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from her face. You make it sound so simple, he said. It's not, but nothing worth having ever is. His thumb traced her cheek, and Eliza's breath caught. She should step back. She knew she should, but she couldn't move. Eliza, he whispered, and then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, hungry, full of everything they hadn't said. Eliza's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and for a moment the world disappeared. There was no Catherine, no contract, no future looming over them. Just this, just them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I can't do this, he said. Not to you. Not while... I know. He pulled back, his hands still on her shoulders. I'm sorry. Don't be. He left, and Eliza stood alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding, her lips still tingling. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, trying to hold on to the feeling, knowing it wouldn't last, because nothing ever did. The next few days passed in a fog. Rowan avoided her. She avoided him. They moved around each other like ghosts, careful not to touch, not to speak beyond what was necessary. Catherine came by once, asking to talk. Eliza made tea and they sat on the porch, two women trapped in the same impossible situation. I don't want to marry him, Catherine said. I never did. Then why are you here? Because my father won't let me go home without a husband. He says I've embarrassed the family, that I need to fix this. Eliza poured more tea. And Rowan's the fix? He's the only option I have left. Catherine's voice broke. I know he doesn't love me. I know he cares about you, but I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. You just don't like your options. Catherine looked at her, tears streaming down her face. What would you do? Eliza thought about it. About every time she'd been backed into a corner, forced to choose between bad and worse. I'd fight, she said. Even if I lost. Because at least then it'd be my choice. Catherine wiped her eyes. You're braver than me. No, I'm just older, and I've lost enough to know that giving up hurts more than trying. They sat in silence after that, two women with nothing in common except the man they both knew they couldn't have. The week crawled to an end. The deadline loomed, and Rowan still hadn't made a decision. On the last night, Eliza found him in the barn, sitting on a bale of hay, staring at nothing. She sat down beside him. Tomorrow's the day, she said. I know. What are you going to do? He let out a long breath. I'm going to marry her. The words cut deep, but Eliza didn't let it show. Okay. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Rowan? That I think you're making a mistake? That you should fight? I've said all that. You didn't listen. I did listen, but some fights can't be won. Eliza stood up. You're wrong. Some fights are just harder than others. But you've already decided, so it doesn't matter what I think. She started to walk away, but his voice stopped her. It matters to me. She turned back. Then why are you doing this? Because I don't have a choice. You keep saying that, but it's not true. You have a choice. You're just too scared to make it. Rowan stood, his face dark with anger. And what would you have me do, Eliza? Defy the Hales? Let them drag me through court? Lose the ranch? Lose everything? Yes, if that's what it takes to keep yourself. That's easy for you to say. You don't have anything to lose. The words hit like a slap. Eliza went very still. You're right, she said quietly. I don't. I never have. So maybe I don't understand what it's like to have something worth protecting. But I know what it's like to give up. And I know how it feels when you realize too late that you should have fought harder. She walked out, leaving him standing there in the dark. The next morning, Eliza packed her things. She didn't have much. A few dresses, a book, the letter from Thomas Kern that had brought her here in the first place. She folded everything carefully, methodically, keeping her hands busy so she didn't have to think. There was a knock on the door. She opened it to find Rowan standing there, looking like he hadn't slept. What are you doing? He asked. Leaving? Why?
Because you're getting married, and I can't stay here and watch that. Rowan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Eliza, don't. Don't what? Don't leave? Don't care? She shook her head. It's too late for that. I know. I know I hurt you, but I need you to understand. I do understand. You're doing what you think you have to do, and I'm doing the same. He grabbed her hand. Stay, please. I can't do this without you. Eliza pulled free. Yes, you can. You'll marry Catherine, you'll keep the ranch, and eventually you'll forget I was ever here. I won't. You will, because that's what people do. They move on. Rowan's face crumpled. I don't want to move on. It doesn't matter what you want, not anymore. She picked up her bag and walked past him, out the door, down the stairs. Her heart was breaking, but she kept moving because stopping meant falling apart.
Outside, the stagecoach was waiting, the same one that had brought her here all those weeks ago. Davis was loading her trunk, his face carefully neutral. Rowan followed her out. Eliza, please, just wait. Let me think. You've had time to think. You made your choice. Then let me make a different one. She turned to face him. Can you? Right now, in front of everyone, can you tell me you're not going to marry Catherine? He opened his mouth, closed it, and said nothing. Eliza nodded. That's what I thought. She climbed onto the coach, and the driver snapped the reins. As they pulled away, she looked back once. Rowan was still standing there, watching her go, and she wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or if he had. The stagecoach made it 3 miles before the wheel hit a rut and cracked. The driver cursed, hauled on the reins, and the whole rig lurched to a stop hard enough to throw Eliza against the side panel. She caught herself, breathing hard, and climbed out to assess the damage. The wheel wasn't just cracked, it was split clean through, spokes jutting out at wrong angles. The driver was already down on his knees, shaking his head. Can you fix it? Eliza asked. Not out here. Need a smithy, new wheel, half a day's work. He spat into the dirt. We're stuck. Eliza looked back down the road toward the ranch, then ahead toward town. Both were miles away. The sun was climbing higher, turning the air thick and hot. How long until someone comes along? She asked. The driver shrugged. Could be an hour, could be tomorrow. This road doesn't see much traffic. Eliza closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settle on her shoulders. Of course this would happen now. She sat down on a flat rock beside the road and waited. The driver unhitched the horses and let them graze. Time crawled. The heat pressed down like a hand, and Eliza's throat grew dry. She'd left her canteen in her trunk, which was strapped to the back of the broken coach, and she didn't have the energy to dig it out. An hour passed. Then another. The driver dozed in the shade of the coach, hat pulled low over his face. Eliza sat and stared at the horizon, watching the heat shimmer and dance. She thought about Rowan, about the look on his face when she'd climbed onto the coach, about the way his hand had reached for her, then dropped. She thought about Catherine, trapped in a life she didn't want, forced into marriage with a man who didn't love her. And she thought about herself running again, because that's what she did. When things got hard, when the ground started to crack beneath her feet, she ran. Except this time, she wasn't sure where she was running to. The sound of hooves brought her head up. A rider was coming fast, dust trailing behind him. Eliza stood, shading her eyes, and her heart kicked hard when she recognized the horse. Rowan. He pulled up sharp, the black gelding snorting and tossing its head. Rowan swung down before the animal had fully stopped, his eyes scanning the broken coach, the driver, then landing on Eliza. You hurt? He asked. No. He let out a breath, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Then he turned to the driver. What happened? Wheel's done. Need to get it back to town for repairs. Rowan nodded, pulled a few bills from his pocket, and handed them over. Take one of my horses, get the wheel fixed, and come back for the coach tomorrow. The driver looked at the money, then at Rowan, then shrugged. Your funeral. He untied one of the coach horses, climbed on bareback, and rode off without another word. Eliza and Rowan stood alone in the middle of the empty road. What are you doing here? Eliza asked. Coming after you. Why? Rowan looked at her, and the rawness in his eyes made her chest ache. Because I made a mistake, because I let you leave, because I'm tired of doing the right thing when it feels so damn wrong. Eliza's throat tightened. Rowan, no. Let me finish. He took a step closer. You were right. About all of it. I've been so afraid of losing what I have that I forgot to fight for what I want. And what I want is you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and impossible.
What about Catherine? Eliza asked. What about the Hales? I don't know. I'll figure it out. But I know I can't marry her, not when... He stopped, shook his head. I can't. Eliza wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope got you hurt. You're going to lose everything, she said. Maybe. Or maybe I'll finally start building something that matters. He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. His palm was warm and rough and steady, and she held on like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Come back with me, Rowan said. Please, we'll face whatever comes. Together. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, at the exhaustion carved into his face, the hope fighting with fear in his eyes, the way he was holding her hand like he was afraid she'd disappear. Okay, she said. Relief flooded his expression. He pulled her close, and she let herself lean into him, just for a moment, feeling the solid weight of him, the steady beat of his heart. Then he let her go, helped her onto his horse, and climbed up behind her. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, not empty, full. When they arrived, the sun was starting to sink toward the hills. The ranch hands stopped their work to stare as Rowan helped Eliza down, but he ignored them. He just led her inside into the cool dimness of the house and closed the door. What now? Eliza asked. Now I go talk to the Hales. And say what? The truth. Eliza caught his arm. Rowan, they're going to fight you. They have money, lawyers, connections. You can't just... I know, but I'm done hiding. He turned to face her. I'm done being the man everyone else wants me to be. It's time I figured out who I actually am. He left before she could argue, and Eliza stood in the empty hallway, her heart pounding. She didn't know if he was brave or foolish, maybe both. She went to the kitchen, made coffee she didn't drink, and waited. Rowan didn't come back until well past dark. When he walked in, he looked like he'd been through a war. His shirt was untucked, his hair disheveled, and there was a fresh bruise blooming along his jaw. Eliza was on her feet in an instant. What happened? Richard Hale has a hell of a right hook. He hit you? After I told them I wasn't going through with the marriage. Yeah. Rowan touched his jaw, winced. Can't say I blame him. Eliza grabbed a cloth, soaked it in cold water, and pressed it to his face. He flinched, but didn't pull away. What did they say? She asked. What you'd expect, that I'm a liar, a coward, that they'll ruin me. He closed his eyes. Thomas Hale said he'd make sure every rancher, every banker, every business owner in the territory knows I can't be trusted, that my word means nothing. And Catherine? She didn't say much, just stood there looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. Eliza's hand stilled on his face. Do you think she'll be okay? I don't know. I hope so. He opened his eyes. I offered to help her, financially. A settlement, enough to start over somewhere else. She refused. Why? Pride, maybe. Or maybe she just wants to be done with all of us. They fell silent. Eliza kept the cloth pressed to his jaw, and Rowan let her, his eyes never leaving her face. I meant what I said, he said quietly, about wanting you, about fighting for this. I know. Are you scared? Terrified. He almost smiled. Me too. Eliza pulled the cloth away, set it aside. So what do we do now? We wait, and we get ready for whatever comes next. What came next was worse than either of them expected. The Hales made good on their threat. Within a week, word had spread through Cinder Ridge and beyond. Rowan Blackwell was a man who couldn't be trusted, who broke contracts, who dishonored agreements. Suppliers refused to deliver. The bank called in a loan. Two of Rowan's best hands quit, saying they didn't want to work for a man with a ruined reputation. The ranch started to bleed. Rowan spent his days trying to hold things together, riding from one crisis to the next, his face growing harder and more closed with each passing day. Eliza did what she could, managed the house, stretched the supplies, kept things running, but she could see the toll it was taking on him. One night she found him in his study, surrounded by ledgers and letters, a bottle of whiskey half empty beside him.
You should eat something, she said. Not hungry. She came into the room, sat down across from him. Rowan, you can't keep doing this. You're running yourself into the ground. What else am I supposed to do? Just let it all fall apart? No, but you can't save it alone. He laughed, bitter and tired. Who's going to help me? Everyone in this territory thinks I'm a fraud. I don't. He looked at her, something breaking in his expression. You should. You'd be better off if you did. Eliza reached across the desk and took his hand. I'm not going anywhere. Even if we lose everything? Even then. Rowan's fingers tightened around hers. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. He pulled her closer and she came around the desk, letting him wrap his arms around her waist, resting his head against her stomach. She ran her fingers through his hair, feeling the tension in his shoulders, the weight he carried. We'll get through this, she said, not sure if she believed it, but needing to say it anyway. Rowan didn't answer. He just held on. The next blow came 3 days later. Eliza was in town, buying what few supplies they could still afford, when she overheard two women talking outside the mercantile. Heard the bank's foreclosing on the Blackwell Ranch. About time. Man made his bed, now he's got to lie in it. Still, it's a shame. That ranch has been in his family for years. Should have thought of that before he broke his word. Eliza's hands clenched around her basket. She wanted to turn around, to tell those women they didn't know what they were talking about. But what good would it do? They'd already made up their minds. She finished her shopping and headed back to the ranch, her stomach in knots. When she got there, Rowan was in the barn with Davis, inspecting one of the horses. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him straighten. What happened? He asked. Is it true? About the bank? His jaw tightened. Where'd you hear that? In town? Is it true? Rowan handed the horse's lead to Davis and walked over to her. They're threatening to, if I can't make the payment by the end of the month. Can you? No. The word landed like a stone. Eliza set her basket down, trying to think. How much do you need? More than I have. There has to be something we can do, someone we can talk to. I've tried. No one's willing to lend to me. Not anymore. Eliza's mind raced. What about selling some of the cattle or the land? Takes time to sell cattle, and the land's tied up in the loan. I can't touch it. Then we'll find another way. Rowan cupped her face in his hands. Eliza, it's over. I've run out of options. No, I don't accept that. You have to. Why? Because you've given up? His eyes flashed. I haven't given up. I'm being realistic. Realistic is just another word for defeated. And what would you have me do? Pull money out of thin air? Eliza pulled away from him, pacing. I don't know, but I know there's always a way. You just have to be willing to fight for it. I've been fighting for weeks, and I'm losing. Then fight harder. Her voice echoed in the barn. The horses shifted nervously in their stalls. Davis quietly slipped out, leaving them alone. Rowan stared at her. Why do you care so much? Because you gave me a chance when no one else would. Because you saw me when everyone else looked through me. Because... She stopped, her throat tight. Because I love you, you stubborn fool. The words hung in the air, raw and true. Rowan went very still. Eliza, I know it's stupid. I know it's probably the worst timing in the world. But it's the truth. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her. Hard and desperate and full of everything they'd been holding back. Eliza kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. When they finally broke apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I love you too. I should have said it sooner. You're saying it now. That's enough. He pulled her close, and they stood there in the dim barn, holding each other while the world crumbled around them. The storm came on a Saturday night. Not a metaphorical one this time. An actual storm, with thunder that rattled the windows and lightning that split the sky like cracks in glass. The wind howled, and rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like fists pounding. Eliza was in the kitchen checking the windows when she heard the shout from outside. She grabbed a lantern and ran to the door, Rowan right behind her. One of the ranch hands was sprinting toward the house, soaked to the skin. The mare! She's in trouble! Rowan was already moving, pulling on his coat. Which one? The chestnut, the one that's due to foal. Eliza's heart dropped. The same mare she'd saved months ago, the one everyone said was Rowan's prize. They ran to the barn, rain lashing their faces. Inside, the mare was down, her sides heaving, eyes rolling white with panic. Blood streaked her hindquarters, and Eliza knew immediately something was very wrong. The ranch hands stood around, useless, scared. Sam held a lantern, his face pale. "What happened?" Rowan demanded. "Don't know, boss. Found her like this." Rowan dropped to his knees beside the mare, his hands moving over her belly. Eliza knelt on the other side, assessing. The foal was coming, but it was bad. Worse than last time. "We need the vet," one of the hands said. "No time," Eliza said. "It's happening now." Rowan looked at her. "Can you?" "I don't know, but I'm going to try." She rolled up her sleeves and went to work. It was harder than before. The foal was bigger, the mare weaker. Eliza's hands shook, but she kept them steady, kept her voice calm, talking the mare through it even though the animal couldn't understand the words. Rowan stayed beside her, holding the lantern, his presence solid and grounding. The storm raged outside, but in the barn, there was only the mare's labored breathing, the creak of the stall, and Eliza's quiet murmur. An hour passed, then 2. Eliza's arms burned, her back screamed, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. And then, finally, the foal slipped free, wet and trembling and alive. The mare lifted her head, nuzzling her baby, and a shaky breath went through the gathered men. Eliza sat back, covered in blood and sweat, her whole body shaking. Rowan pulled her to her feet, his eyes bright. "You did it," he said. "We did it." He kissed her, right there in front of everyone, and she didn't care. Let them see. Let them know. When they pulled apart, Davis was grinning. "Hell of a woman you got there, boss." "Don't I know it?" They stumbled back to the house, soaked and exhausted. Eliza stripped off her ruined dress, washed the blood from her hands, and collapsed into bed. Rowan lay down beside her, pulling her close. "Thank you," he said into her hair. "For what?" "For not giving up. On the mare. On me. On any of this." Eliza closed her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, Rowan. No matter what happens. Even if we lose the ranch?" Even then, he held her tighter, and she felt the tension in him finally ease. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, the thunder fading into the distance. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in weeks, Rowan's face was peaceful. But peace never lasted long. The letter arrived on Monday. Official, stamped, cold. The bank was foreclosing. They had 30 days to vacate the property. Rowan read it twice, then set it on the table. His face was blank, but Eliza could see the devastation underneath. "That's it then," he said quietly. "No, there's still time." "Time for what? A miracle?" "Maybe." He looked at her like she was crazy. "Eliza, it's over. We lost. We haven't lost until we give up. I'm tired of fighting." "Then rest. But don't quit." Rowan closed his eyes. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to remember why you fought in the first place. Not for the ranch, not for your reputation, for yourself. For the life you want to build. And what if I can't build it? What if I'm not strong enough?" Eliza took his face in her hands. "You're the strongest man I know. But strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up." He let out a shaky breath. "I don't know how." "Then let me help you." And for the first time since the letter arrived, something like hope flickered in his eyes. They spent the next 3 days trying everything. Rowan rode to every neighboring ranch, hat in hand, asking for loans, extensions, anything. He came back each time with the same answer: no. The Hales had done their work well. Rowan Blackwell's name was mud, and no one wanted to risk their own reputation by helping him. Eliza watched him come undone piece by piece. The hope that had flickered in his eyes after the storm dimmed a little more each day. By Wednesday, he was barely speaking, just going through the motions, preparing for the inevitable. She found him in the corral that afternoon, standing alone, staring at the hills. She walked over and stood beside him, not touching, just present. "I used to think this place was everything," he said. "My father built it, my grandfather before him. I thought if I lost it, I'd lose myself. And now? Now I'm not sure what I thought was so damn important." He turned to look at her. "I'd give it all up in a heartbeat if it meant keeping you." Eliza's chest tightened. You're not losing me. You don't know that. Once we're off this land, once I've got nothing to offer, stop. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. You think I'm here for the ranch? For what you own? I came here with nothing, Rowan. I expected nothing. What I got was you. That's what matters. I'm about to be a broke rancher with no land and no future. Then we'll be broke together. I've been poor before. I know how to survive it. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. You keep saying that. Maybe start believing you do. They stood there while the sun dipped lower, holding each other against the weight of everything falling apart. That night, there was a knock on the door. Eliza answered it to find Martha from the mercantile standing on the porch, a basket in her arms and a determined look on her face. Martha? What are you doing here? Brought some things. Figured you could use them. She pushed past Eliza into the house, setting the basket on the kitchen table. It was filled with bread, preserves, coffee, and other supplies. Eliza stared at it. I can't pay for this. Didn't ask you to. Martha crossed her arms. Look, I know what people are saying about Rowan, and maybe some of it's true. Maybe he made mistakes. But I've lived in this town 30 years, and I've seen good men, and I've seen bad ones. Rowan Blackwell's a good one, stubborn as hell, but good. Then why won't anyone help him? Because people are scared. The Hales have money, influence. Nobody wants to cross them. Martha's expression softened. But that doesn't mean everyone agrees with what's happening. Some of us remember what Rowan's done for this town, how he's helped people when they needed it. Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm not the only one coming. Over the next hour, more people arrived. The blacksmith brought tools. A widow brought 2 chickens and a sack of grain. Even old Mr. Peterson, who ran the feed store, showed up with a sympathetic grimace and a bag of oats. Can't give you credit, he said gruffly, but I can give you this. Call it a gift. Rowan stood in the doorway, watching it all, his face a mixture of disbelief and something that looked dangerously close to tears. When the last person left, he turned to Eliza. I don't understand. People remember, Rowan. They remember who you are, even when you forget. He sat down heavily at the table, staring at the pile of supplies. It's not enough to save the ranch. I know, but it's enough to know you're not alone. He looked up at her, and the gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to see. The next morning brought a different kind of visitor. Eliza was hanging laundry when she heard the carriage. She turned to see the same fancy rig that had brought the Hales weeks ago. Her stomach dropped, but when the door opened, it wasn't Thomas Hale who stepped out. It was Catherine. She looked different, thinner, paler, like she hadn't been sleeping. But there was something else in her face, too, a hardness that hadn't been there before. Eliza walked over slowly. Catherine. Mrs. Harrow. Catherine's voice was formal, careful. Is Mr. Blackwell here? He's in the barn. I need to speak with him, with both of you, actually. Eliza led her across the yard. Rowan emerged from the barn, saw Catherine, and his whole body went tense. What are you doing here? He asked. I came to talk. Catherine glanced between them. Somewhere private? They went to the house. Catherine sat stiffly in the parlor, her hands clasped in her lap. Rowan and Eliza sat across from her, waiting. My father doesn't know I'm here, Catherine said. If he did, he'd lock me in my room and throw away the key. Then why are you here? Rowan asked. Catherine took a breath. Because what he's doing is wrong. What they're all doing. I didn't want any of this. I never wanted to marry you. I know. But my father doesn't care what I want. He cares about his reputation, about making sure everyone knows the Hale family doesn't get disrespected. She looked at Eliza. He was furious when you came back. He said it proved Rowan was never serious about honoring the arrangement. Eliza's hands clenched. I'm sorry. Don't be. You did what I didn't have the courage to do. You chose. Catherine turned back to Rowan. I'm here because I want to help. If I can. Rowan frowned. How? I have money. My mother left me an inheritance when she died. My father controls most of it, but there's some he can't touch. It's not a lot, but it might be enough to help with the bank. The room went silent. Rowan stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Why would you do that? He asked. Because I'm tired of being used as a weapon. And because you don't deserve to lose everything just because you wouldn't marry someone you didn't love. Catherine's voice wavered. I know what that feels like. To be forced into something you don't want. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. Catherine, I don't want your thanks. I just want to do something right for once. She pulled an envelope from her bag and set it on the table. That's a bank draft. It should cover most of what you owe. I can't save the ranch completely, but maybe it'll buy you time. Rowan picked up the envelope with shaking hands. Catherine, I can't take this. Yes, you can. Because if you don't, my father wins. And I'm so tired of him winning. What will he do when he finds out? I don't know. Maybe he'll disown me. Maybe he'll drag me back to St. Louis and marry me off to someone else. But at least I'll know I made my own choice for once. She stood up and Eliza stood with her. On impulse, Eliza pulled the younger woman into a hug. Catherine stiffened, then slowly relaxed, her arms coming up to return the embrace. Thank you, Eliza whispered. Take care of him, Catherine whispered back. He's a better man than he thinks he is. When they pulled apart, Catherine's eyes were wet. She brushed past Rowan without another word and walked out. They watched her carriage disappear down the road. Rowan looked at the envelope in his hands like it might explode. This doesn't feel real, he said. It's real. She's going to suffer for this. When her father finds out, she knows, and she did it anyway. Eliza took his hand. That's called bravery. Rowan opened the envelope. The bank draft was for more than Eliza had ever seen in one place. Enough to pay the bank. Enough to buy time. We have to use it, Eliza said. We can't let her sacrifice be for nothing. Rowan nodded slowly. You're right. He looked at her. But this doesn't solve everything. Even with this, we're barely hanging on. The ranch is still in trouble. My reputation is still ruined. Then we rebuild. Slowly. Together. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt him shaking. Not from fear this time. From relief. From hope. From the overwhelming weight of realizing they might actually survive this. They rode to town the next morning, the bank draft carefully tucked in Rowan's coat. The bank manager was a thin man with spectacles and a permanent frown, and he looked at Rowan like something he'd scraped off his shoe. Mr. Blackwell, I wasn't expecting to see you. I'm here to make a payment. Rowan set the draft on the desk. The manager picked it up, examined it, and his eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Where did you get this? That's my business. Will it cover the payment? The man did some quick calculations, his frown deepening. It will, with some left over. Then apply it to the account. Mr. Blackwell, even with this payment, your situation is precarious. One more missed payment and up. I understand. Just process it. The manager pursed his lips but did as asked. When he handed over the receipt, his expression was sour. Rowan took it and walked out without another word. Outside, Eliza was waiting. Well? We bought ourselves 3 months, maybe 4 if we're careful. Then we'll make it count. As they walked to the wagon, Eliza noticed people watching, some with curiosity, some with hostility, and some, like Martha, who waved from the mercantile, with something like hope. Word of the payment spread fast. By evening, half the town knew. And by the next morning, Thomas Hale knew too. He arrived at the ranch like a thunderstorm given human form, his face purple with rage, Richard beside him looking equally furious. Rowan met them in the yard, his expression calm but his hand resting on the gun at his hip. Where is she? Thomas demanded. Who? My daughter. You son of a bitch. What did you do to her? I didn't do anything. Catherine came here of her own free will. Liar! She would never... Thomas stopped, his jaw working. She gave you money, didn't she? Rowan said nothing. That money was meant for her future, for her security, and you took it. She offered it. I didn't ask. You manipulated her, seduced her with your... Thomas's gaze cut to Eliza, who stood on the porch. With your whore. Rowan moved so fast, Eliza barely saw it. 1 second he was standing still, the next he had Thomas by the collar, his face inches away. You call her that again, Rowan said, his voice deadly quiet, and I'll put you in the ground. I don't care who you are. Richard lunged forward, but Davis and Sam stepped in, blocking him. The yard went very still, very tense. Thomas's face had gone from purple to white. You're finished, Blackwell. I'll make sure of it.
You already tried. I'm still here.
Not for long. Thomas shoved Rowan's hands away, straightening his coat. My lawyers are drawing up a lawsuit for fraud, breach of contract, and theft. By the time we're done with you, you won't have a pot to piss in. Good luck with that. Thomas's eyes narrowed. You think you've won? You think some charity from weak-minded townspeople and stolen money from my daughter will save you? You're delusional. Maybe, but at least I can sleep at night. We'll see how well you sleep when you're living in the dirt. Thomas stalked back to his carriage, Richard following. They drove off in a cloud of dust and fury. Rowan stood there, his hands clenched, breathing hard. Eliza came down from the porch and touched his arm. You shouldn't have threatened him, she said. I meant it. I know, that's what worries me. He turned to look at her. No one talks about you like that. I don't care who they are.
Rowan, he's dangerous. Men like him don't forgive being challenged. Then let him come. I'm done being afraid. He walked away and Eliza watched him go, her stomach tight with worry. Rowan thought standing up to Thomas Hale made him strong, but Eliza had seen men like Thomas before. They didn't fight fair, and they didn't lose gracefully. The lawsuit came a week later, pages and pages of legal language that boiled down to one thing. The Hales wanted blood. Rowan sat with the papers spread across his desk, his face drawn. They're claiming I defrauded Catherine, that I lured her here under false pretenses with the intent to steal her money. Can they prove that? They don't have to prove it. They just have to make it expensive enough that I can't fight back. He tossed the papers down. Legal fees alone will bankrupt me. Then we find a lawyer who'll work for less. Eliza, there is no less. This kind of case, it's going to cost thousands. Money we don't have. She refused to let despair sink its teeth in. Then we'll find another way. There is no other way. His voice echoed through the house. He stood up, pacing, running his hands through his hair. I'm so damn tired of fighting. Every time I think we've caught a break, something else comes along to knock us down. I don't know how much more I can take. Eliza stood and crossed to him, grabbing his arms, forcing him to look at her. Then lean on me. You don't have to carry this alone. You've already given up everything for me. I gave up nothing. I chose you. There's a difference. Rowan's face crumpled. He pulled her close, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him upright. And maybe she was. That night, Eliza lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Rowan's breathing beside her. He'd finally fallen asleep, but it was restless, troubled. She could see the tension even in his sleep. She thought about Catherine, risking her father's wrath to help them, about Martha and the others who'd brought supplies, about Davis and Sam who could have left weeks ago but stayed. People believed in Rowan, even when he didn't believe in himself. And somehow, Eliza had to make him see that. The idea came to her just before dawn. It was risky, maybe even foolish, but it was something. She slipped out of bed, dressed quietly, and went downstairs. She wrote a note for Rowan, short and to the point, then saddled one of the horses and rode into town. The sun was just breaking over the hills when she reached the boarding house. She knocked on Catherine's door, praying the younger woman was still there. Catherine answered in her nightgown, her eyes widening when she saw Eliza. Mrs. Harrow, what are you doing here? I need your help. One more time. Catherine stepped back, letting her in. What's wrong? Your father's suing Rowan for fraud. He's going to drag this out until there's nothing left. Catherine's face went pale. I was afraid of that. I need you to testify, to tell the truth about what happened, that you came to Rowan willingly, that you gave him the money of your own free will. Eliza, if I do that, my father he'll destroy me. I know, and I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. But Rowan needs someone to stand up and tell the truth, and you're the only one who can. Catherine wrapped her arms around herself, looking young and scared. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are. You've already proven it. That was different. That was just money. This is standing up in front of everyone and calling my father a liar. Yes, it is. Eliza took her hands. Catherine, I know I have no right to ask this of you, but if you don't, Rowan loses everything, and your father wins. Catherine closed her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, I'll do it. Relief flooded through Eliza. Thank you. Don't thank me yet.
My father's lawyers are good. They'll tear me apart on that stand. Let them try. You're stronger than they think. Catherine gave her a shaky smile. I hope you're right. When Eliza got back to the ranch, Rowan was waiting on the porch, her note in his hand. He looked furious. What the hell were you thinking? He demanded. I was thinking we needed help. From Catherine? Eliza, she's already risked enough. I won't let you drag her into this mess any deeper. I didn't drag her. I asked, and she said yes. Rowan's jaw clenched. And when her father retaliates, when he makes her life hell, then we help her, the same way she helped us. It's not that simple. It never is. But we're out of options, Rowan. Either we fight with everything we have, or we give up. And I'm not ready to give up. He stared at her, his chest heaving, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Fear, anger, hope, all battling for control. Finally, he let out a breath. You're going to be the death of me, woman. Probably, but you'll go down fighting. Despite everything, he almost smiled. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out. In that time, Eliza and Rowan prepared as best they could. They gathered documents, statements from people who knew them, anything that might help. Catherine stayed in town, avoiding her father. Eliza visited her every few days, bringing food and conversation, trying to keep the younger woman's spirits up. I'm scared, Catherine admitted one afternoon. So am I. What if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing and make it worse? You won't. Just tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask. Catherine nodded, but Eliza could see the doubt in her eyes. The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray, the sky threatening rain. The courthouse was packed. Half the town had shown up, eager for the spectacle. Eliza sat beside Rowan in the front row, her hands clenched in her lap. Across the aisle, Thomas Hale sat with his lawyers, his face a mask of righteous fury. Richard sat beside him, his expression equally cold. The judge entered, a stern woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She banged her gavel and the room fell silent. Let's get started, she said. The Hales' lawyer went first, laying out their case. He painted Rowan as a con man, a liar who'd manipulated a vulnerable young woman for financial gain. He made it sound damning, professional, airtight. Eliza felt Rowan tense beside her. Then it was their turn. Rowan's lawyer, a young man from Denver who was working for half his usual fee, did his best. He presented the documents, the timeline, the evidence that Rowan had never asked Catherine for money. But it wasn't enough. Eliza could see it in the judge's face, the doubt, the skepticism. And then Catherine took the stand. She looked small up there, her face pale, her hands shaking. The Hales' lawyer approached her like a wolf circling prey. Miss Hale, you gave Mr. Blackwell a substantial sum of money, is that correct? Yes. And he asked you for this money? No. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. No? Then why did you give it to him? Because I wanted to help. Help? Or were you coerced? No, I offered it freely. Miss Hale, isn't it true that Mr. Blackwell led you to believe he would marry you? No, he never promised me anything. But the arrangement was made by my father and a man who's now dead. Rowan never agreed to it. The lawyer's expression hardened. So you're saying your father lied? Catherine swallowed hard. I'm saying my father made assumptions, and when Rowan didn't meet those assumptions, my father decided to punish him. A murmur went through the courtroom. Thomas Hale's face turned scarlet. Your witness, the Hales' lawyer said tightly. Rowan's lawyer stood. Miss Hale, did Mr. Blackwell ever threaten you? No. Did he ever manipulate you or pressure you in any way? No, he was honest with me, more honest than anyone else has been in a long time. And the money you gave him, do you regret it? Catherine looked straight at her father. No, I don't. Thomas Hale stood up. This is absurd. She's been manipulated. The judge banged her gavel. Mr. Hale, sit down or I'll have you removed. Thomas sat, but his fury was palpable. The lawyer finished his questions and Catherine stepped down. As she passed Eliza, their eyes met and Eliza mouthed, Thank you. Catherine nodded, then walked to the back of the room and sat alone. The judge called a recess to review the evidence. Eliza and Rowan waited in the hallway, too nervous to speak. Finally, after what felt like hours, they were called back in. The judge looked at the papers in front of her, then at the Hales, then at Rowan. "I've reviewed the evidence," she said, "and while I find Mr. Blackwell's decisions questionable, I find no evidence of fraud or coercion. Miss Hale's testimony is clear. She gave the money willingly. Case dismissed." The gavel came down. Thomas Hale shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. I demand—" "You can demand all you want, Mr. Hale. My ruling stands." The judge's eyes were hard. "And I suggest you think carefully before bringing frivolous lawsuits into my courtroom again." She stood and left. The courtroom erupted in noise, people talking, arguing, exclaiming, but Eliza barely heard it. She turned to Rowan, and the look on his face, relief, disbelief, joy, was everything. He pulled her into his arms, and she held on tight. They'd won. But as they walked out of the courthouse, Eliza saw Thomas Hale standing by his carriage, staring at them with a hatred so pure it made her skin crawl. This wasn't over. Not really. Men like Thomas Hale didn't forgive. They just waited for another chance. But for now, they'd survived. And that was enough. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy silence that had weighed on them for weeks. This was different, lighter, like they could finally breathe. Rowan held the reins loosely, his other hand resting on Eliza's knee. She covered it with her own, and neither of them spoke. Words felt unnecessary. They'd said everything that mattered in that courtroom, not with their mouths, but with their presence, together, standing. When they crested the hill and the ranch came into view, Rowan pulled the horses to a stop. He just sat there, looking at it, the house with its sagging porch, the barn that needed repairs, the corrals and the land stretching out toward the hills. "Still looks like a mess," he said. "It's our mess." He turned to her, and the smile that broke across his face was the most beautiful thing Eliza had ever seen. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't. It was tired and a little broken and full of relief. But it was real. "Yeah," he said, "it is." They drove the rest of the way home. The celebration, if you could call it that, was small. Davis and Sam had heard the news in town and were waiting when they arrived, grinning like fools. Davis clapped Rowan on the back hard enough to make him stumble. "Knew you'd pull through, boss." "I didn't do it alone." Sam looked at Eliza with something close to reverence. "Ma'am, you're tougher than half the men I know." Eliza laughed. "Only half?" "Didn't want to insult anyone." They opened a bottle of whiskey that had been gathering dust in the cellar and passed it around. It wasn't fancy, but it tasted like victory, like survival. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eliza stood on the porch and looked out over the land. It was harsh country, unforgiving, but it was also beautiful in its own stubborn way. Rowan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That we're not out of the woods yet." Always the optimist. "Just being honest. The ranch is still in trouble. We've got debts, bad blood with the Hales, and half the territory thinks you're a liar." "So what do we do?" Eliza turned in his arms to face him. "We keep going. We rebuild. We prove them wrong. That's going to take time." "Then it's a good thing I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her, slow and deep, and Eliza let herself sink into it. Into him, into the promise of something that might actually last. When they pulled apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me." Eliza went very still. "What?" "Marry me. Not because of some contract or arrangement, because I love you. Because I can't imagine doing any of this without you." Her throat tightened. "Rowan, I know the timing's terrible. I know we've got 100 problems and no money, and the whole territory probably thinks we're insane, but I don't care. I want you. For the rest of my life, however long that is. So marry me." Eliza looked at him. This stubborn, broken, beautiful man who'd given her a second chance when no one else would, who'd fought for her even when it cost him everything. "Yes," she said. His eyes widened. "Yes? Yes, you idiot! I'll marry you!" He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around. She laughed, holding on to him,
and for a moment everything else fell away. They were married 3 weeks later in the small chapel at the edge of town. It wasn't a fancy affair. Eliza wore a simple dress she'd borrowed from Martha, and Rowan wore his cleanest shirt and a tie that didn't quite match. But it was theirs. Martha and her husband came. Davis and Sam stood as witnesses, looking uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. Even old Mr. Peterson showed up, grumbling about how he had better things to do but staying for the whole ceremony anyway. Catherine Hale came too. She sat in the back wearing a dark dress and a veil, trying not to draw attention. But Eliza saw her. After the ceremony, she went over. "Thank you for coming." Catherine smiled, sad and genuine. "I wouldn't have missed it. You two deserve this. So do you. Happiness, I mean. Maybe someday." Catherine glanced toward the door. "I should go. My father doesn't know I'm here, and if he finds out..." "Where will you go?" "East, I think. I have an aunt in Philadelphia who's offered to take me in, at least until I figure out what comes next." Eliza took her hand. "If you ever need anything..." "I know. Thank you, Eliza, for everything." Catherine left quietly, and Eliza watched her go with a pang of sadness. She hoped the younger woman would find what she was looking for. Peace, if nothing else. Rowan came up beside her, sliding an arm around her waist. "You ready to go home, Mrs. Blackwell?" The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Blackwell. After all these years, after everything she'd been through, she finally had a name that felt like it belonged. "Yeah," she said, "I'm ready." The first few months of marriage were hard. Not between them. That part was easy, natural, like they'd been doing it for years. But the ranch was struggling. Cattle prices dropped. A late frost killed half the garden Eliza had worked so hard to grow. And the whispers in town hadn't stopped, even after the lawsuit was dismissed. But they worked. Every day from sunup to sundown, they worked. Rowan mended fences and broke horses. Eliza managed the house, the books, the 1,000 small things that kept a ranch running. Slowly, painfully, they started to turn things around. By summer, they'd sold enough cattle to pay off another chunk of debt. By fall, Rowan had hired 2 more hands, good men who didn't care about gossip, just honest work. And by winter, the ranch was starting to feel less like a burden and more like a home. One evening in December, Eliza was in the kitchen making stew when Rowan came in, stomping snow off his boots. He looked exhausted, his face red from the cold, but there was a lightness in his eyes. "Got a letter today," he said, pulling an envelope from his coat. "From who?" "The territorial governor's office." Eliza's hand stilled on the knife. "What do they want?" "They're looking for ranchers to supply beef to the army. It's a government contract. Good money, steady work." He set the letter on the table. "I applied months ago. Didn't think I'd hear back. And? They want to meet, talk terms." Eliza set the knife down and crossed to him. "Rowan, that could change everything." "I know, but it's not guaranteed. They're meeting with a dozen ranchers. We have to convince them we're the best choice." "Then we will." He pulled her close. "You have more faith in me than I deserve." "No, I have exactly the right amount." The meeting was set for early January in Denver. They made the trip together, bundled against the cold, the wagon rattling over frozen roads. The city was bigger than Eliza remembered, crowded and loud and overwhelming. The meeting took place in a government building that smelled like old wood and bureaucracy. Rowan presented their case, the quality of their cattle, their reliability, their willingness to meet deadlines. Eliza sat beside him, quiet but present, and when the officials asked questions, she answered them with the same calm competence she'd shown that night in the barn with the mayor. When it was over, they walked out into the cold Denver afternoon, not knowing if they'd done enough. "How do you think it went?" Rowan asked. "I think we gave them everything we had. The rest is up to them." They stayed in a boarding house that night, too tired to make the trip back. In the morning, as they were packing to leave, there was a knock on the door. A messenger stood there with another letter. Rowan opened it, read it, and went very still. "What is it?" Eliza asked. He looked up at her, and there were tears in his eyes. "We got it. The contract. They chose us." Eliza felt something break open in her chest. Relief, joy, disbelief all tangled together. She threw her arms around him, and he held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it." "We did.
They rode home in a daze, the contract tucked safely in Rowan's coat. When they reached the ranch and told Davis and Sam, the men whooped and hollered like children. That night, they had a real celebration, roasted a chicken, opened the last bottle of decent whiskey, and sat around the fire talking and laughing until late. Eliza watched Rowan across the flames, saw the weight that had been pressing on him for so long finally start to lift. He caught her looking and smiled, and she smiled back. They were going to be okay. Not perfect, not easy, but okay. The contract brought stability. Money came in steadily, and with it, the ability to make real repairs. They fixed the barn, replaced the broken fences, bought better stock. The ranch started to thrive in a way it hadn't in years. And with the ranch's success came something else: respect. The people in town who'd turned their backs started nodding again when Rowan passed. Suppliers who'd refused to extend credit started doing business again. It was slow, grudging, but it was happening. One afternoon in early spring, Martha stopped by with a basket of fresh bread and a knowing smile. "Heard you got that government contract," she said. "News travels fast." "Always does. People are talking about you too, saying you're proof that hard work pays off." Eliza almost laughed. Hard work. As if that was all it took. As if luck and stubbornness and sheer refusal to quit hadn't played just as big a role. But she didn't say that. She just smiled and thanked Martha for the bread. After she left, Rowan came up beside Eliza on the porch. "You think we'll ever stop being the town's favorite topic of conversation?" "Probably not. People need something to talk about. At least now they're saying nicer things. Give it time. They'll find something else to criticize." He laughed and pulled her close. "As long as they leave you alone, I don't care what they say about me." "They won't, but I can handle it." "I know you can." They stood there watching the sun sink behind the hills, and Eliza thought about how far they'd come. From that first day in Cinder Ridge when she'd been a stranger with nothing but a dead man's letter and a trunk full of worn-out dresses, to now, standing on land that bore her name, beside a man who loved her not despite her scars, but because of them. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been smooth, but it had been real. Summer came, hot and bright, and with it, news that made Eliza's stomach twist. Thomas Hale was dead. The telegram came from Catherine, brief and businesslike. Her father had suffered a heart attack in his office. He'd been dead before the doctor arrived. The funeral would be held in St. Louis. Eliza showed the telegram to Rowan. He read it without expression, then handed it back. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't know. He made my life hell for months, but I can't say I'm glad he's dead." "Neither can I." They attended the funeral, not because they wanted to, but because Catherine had asked. The service was formal and cold, full of people who looked like they were there out of obligation rather than grief. Richard Hale stood at the front, his face a mask, accepting condolences with mechanical politeness. Catherine found them after the service. She looked different, older, steadier, like something in her had settled. "Thank you for coming," she said. "How are you?" Eliza asked. "Free." Catherine glanced back at the mourners. "He left everything to Richard, the business, the money, all of it. I got a small inheritance, enough to live on, but more than that, I got my life back." "What will you do?" "I'm moving to Philadelphia. My aunt runs a school for girls. She's offered me a position teaching. It's not glamorous, but it's mine." Eliza smiled. "That sounds perfect." Catherine hugged her, tight and genuine. "Thank you for showing me it was possible to choose." "You did that yourself." "Maybe, but you helped." They said their goodbyes, and Eliza watched Catherine walk away, straight-backed and sure. She'd found her second chance, just like Eliza had. The years that followed were good ones, not perfect. There were droughts and hard winters and times when money got tight. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. The ranch grew. They bought more land, hired more hands, built a reputation for quality stock and honest dealing. Rowan's name, once mud, became one people spoke with respect. Eliza ran the house with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. She kept the books, managed the supplies, and became known in town as the woman you didn't cross. Not because she was mean, but because she was fair and wouldn't tolerate nonsense. On their 5th anniversary, Rowan found her in the garden, the same garden she'd brought back from the dead that first summer. It was thriving now, full of vegetables and flowers, and the kind of abundance that came from patient care. He stood watching her work, and when she looked up, he was smiling. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am. How close I came to losing all of this because I was too scared to fight for it." Eliza stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "You weren't too scared. You just needed someone to remind you what you were fighting for." "And what was that?" "Yourself, not the ranch, not your reputation. You." Rowan pulled her close, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest. "I love you," he said. "I know I don't say it enough, but I do. More than I thought I could love anything." "I love you too." They stood there in the garden, holding each other while the sun warmed their backs and the wind rustled through the plants. Life wasn't easy. It never would be. But they'd learned something important, that the hard things were worth it, that fighting for what mattered, even when it cost you everything, was the only way to build something real. Eliza had come to Cinder Ridge expecting nothing, hoping for very little, and she'd found more than she ever imagined. Not because she was perfect, or because the world suddenly decided to be kind, but because she'd refused to quit. Because she'd stood her ground when everyone told her to leave. Because she'd chosen to believe that she deserved more than the scraps life had thrown her way. And in the end, that choice, that simple, stubborn refusal to give up, had changed everything. One evening, years later, Eliza stood on the porch of the house she'd helped rebuild. The ranch spread out before her, healthy and thriving. Rowan was in the corral with a young colt, his movements patient and sure. Gray threaded through his dark hair now, and lines creased his face, but he was still the man she'd fallen in love with. Maybe even more so. She thought about the letter in her pocket, the one from Thomas Kern that had brought her here all those years ago. She'd kept it, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of where she'd been, of how far she'd come. But she didn't need it anymore. She knew who she was now, not the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach, worn and hoping for scraps, but someone who'd built a life with her own hands, who'd fought for her place and earned it. She pulled the letter out, looked at it one last time, then walked to the small fire pit they used for burning trash. She dropped the letter in and watched it catch, the edges curling and blackening, the words disappearing into ash. Rowan saw her from the corral and walked over. "What was that?" "The past," Eliza said. "I don't need to carry it anymore." He slid an arm around her waist, and they watched the last of the letter burn away. "Any regrets?" he asked. Eliza thought about it, about all the pain and struggle and fear, about the times she'd wanted to quit, about the moments when she'd wondered if any of it was worth it. "No," she said, "not one." Rowan kissed her temple. "Me neither." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that had no names, and Eliza felt something she'd spent most of her life searching for: peace. Not the kind that came from having everything figured out, but the kind that came from knowing she'd done her best, that she'd fought for what mattered, that she'd chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and herself over what everyone else thought she should be. The frontier had a way of breaking people, of taking everything they had and leaving them hollow, but it also had a way of forging strength in those who refused to break, who stood their ground and said, "Not today, not me." Eliza Harrow had arrived in Cinder Ridge with nothing but scars and stubbornness. She'd been dismissed, underestimated, told she was too old, too worn, too broken to matter. And she'd proven every single one of them wrong, not by being perfect, not by never falling, but by getting back up, again and again and again. Because that's what survivors did. They endured, they adapted, they fought. And sometimes, if they were lucky and stubborn and refused to quit, they won. Years later, when people in Cinder Ridge told stories about Rowan Blackwell and his ranch, they always mentioned the woman who'd stood beside him, the one who'd saved the mare, restored the garden, and refused to leave even when the whole world told her she should. They called her strong, brave, a force of nature. But Eliza knew the truth. She wasn't any of those things. Not really. She was just a woman who decided she was worth fighting for. And in the end, that had been enough. The ranch bore both their names now, carved into the wooden sign that hung over the gate: Blackwell and Harrow. Two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of broken promises and built something that lasted. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happily ever after, because life didn't work that way. There were still hard days and lean times and moments when the weight of it all felt too heavy. But there was also love and partnership and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd earned every inch of ground they stood on. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eliza leaned against Rowan and thought about the future. About the life they'd continue to build. About the legacy they'd leave behind. Not one of perfection, but one of resilience. Of two imperfect people who'd chosen each other and refused to let go. And that, Eliza thought, was worth more than any promise written on paper. That was real.